What do you not mess around with now that you've found out? Story 1. Just because you climbed up something doesn't mean you can climb down. Off-roading with my cousin in the late 2000s, we went into a dried-up riverbed and bombed around for a few hours. After a few hours, we decided to head back to camp and realized the trip down was way steeper than we had initially thought. After a whole bunch of different things to make it, me sitting behind the rear axle, him sitting behind the rear axle, standing up on the front seat, leaning forward, gunning it halfway up, then rolling back down the cutoff road, everything. The top bit was just too steep. He nearly flipped it twice. The sun was going down and we were getting kind of worried. Out of nowhere, this group of guys in a massive crew cab 12-valve Ram came and pulled us up the hill in exchange for the rest of the beer that we had on us. Lesson: Jeep doesn't mean you can climb everything. A few weeks ago, I drove up Pikes Peak. I had woken up that morning in Pittsburgh, flew to Denver, work trip, and drove down to Colorado Springs. I had a few hours before hotel check-in and was like, last time I was here, Pikes Peak was snowed in. Now it's the summer, so I should check it out. I was not the least bit prepared or acclimated to the elevation, and in the past, I would have problems adjusting to the elevation, so I knew I was tempting fate. But I did it anyway. When I got to the top, the elevation hit me hard. I had a splitting headache, would get winded from a few steps, was seeing spots, and felt like I was going to pass out. And then I realized I'm in no condition to drive back down. The path down is 15 miles of steep hairpin curves, and only the occasional guardrail. It's bad enough that you have to engine brake on the way down or your brakes will overheat and fail. I got a giant bottle of water and started hydrating like I was about to hike across Death Valley. I sat in the car, drinking water and resting, trying to nap over the headache. After about 45 minutes, I was feeling a little bit more alert and responsive, and started to trek down the mountain, very carefully, taking occasional stops to get recomposed. After about a mile back down the road, I dropped about 1,000 feet in elevation and I felt 100% better. In fact, I felt great for the rest of the trip. Instead of slowly adjusting to the elevation, I just got all the suffering done at once. For future reference, there's a train in Manitou Springs to the top of the peak, so you don't have to drive yourself. I wish I had known. Elk hunting solo. I was pretty out of shape. I did a 9-mile hike and made it back a while before dark as I was out of the water and it was hot. I could see my car on the road, but could not for the life of me figure out how I made it up the cliff in an easy spot. I ended up doing another 6 miles around to get out to the road, and then back a few miles up to the road in the dark. I slept for 12 hours and peed brown for days from muscle breakdown. Not cool. I was just chugging Gatorade for days. Back in the early 90s, I was a teen and living in Idaho. My buddy and I used to hike in the Sawtooth Mountains often, because there was this one particular tiny mountain lake that we kind of thought was ours. It was gorgeous and secluded. It took about 6 hours to hike up from the trailhead, and most of that time was off trail. You really had to know how to get there in order to make it, which is kind of why we liked it. Anyway, at about the 5-hour mark, there is a part we called the Boulder Field from Hell. It was a waterfall of massive granite boulders that was a few hundred feet tall from the base. The joke was that the BFFH tried to kill you a different way each time you went there. Sometimes it's just slippery rocks. One time the whole thing was covered in these very succulent plants. One year there were super high winds and we thought they might blow us off. But the time that almost got me was when the whole thing was covered in almost 4 feet thick hard snow and ice. It's the only way up to the lake, and the granite walls to either side are basically impassable. I wouldn't have even thought to attempt to climb them, as they're just sheer granite faces. But we weren't going to let that stop us. We both had big knives that we liked to wear on our belts for these trips, so we used them like ice packs, and chiseled hand and footholds into the ice to climb up. It was really hard work, ruined our knives, and we were nearly exhausted by the time we made it to the top, but hooray for us, we did it, and walked the rest of the way to the lake. Well, we messed up. Spent too long there, and since we intended it to be a day hike, I didn't bring anything to sleep on to conserve weight, and the nights got super cold there. So we start back, and we get to the BFFH soon enough. Only our chopped hand and footholds were unusable. They'd grown slick and melty in the sun and waterfall spray. Our hands were still red and burning from using them to climb up the ice, and my muscles were already fatigued. But nothing else to be done, we didn't have any other way out. No radio or phone. The time was short. My buddy started down first, and I tried to follow. About a quarter of the way down, I lost my grip. There was a little bit of a slope, so it was more like uncontrollable sliding than straight falling. But I had to keep myself from going into the waterfall, or it was possible I'd get stuck under the water and ice with no way up. I panicked. I tried to dig my knife into the ice as hard as I could to slow myself, but I lost my grip and the damn thing sliced open my hand from about the base of my palm up the outside edge to just under my pinky. I also hit my friend on the way down and we slid together. By pure idiotic luck, we were not dead. I was hurt badly and left a streak of blood on the ice, but we were okay enough to catch our breath and hike the rest of the way down. The scar on my hand is now a reminder of how lucky I was. Story 2. Do not attach two very active dogs to the handle of a Razor scooter because you want to see if they'd be good sled dogs. I used to have a recumbent trike, very low, very stable. Two things I learned from attaching dogs to it, both not great. One, some dogs will decide that sitting on my chest is easier than running. Steering, when all you can see is doggy derriere, isn't easy. The smell is educational. 2. Two large, enthusiastic dogs can definitely pull the trike. Sideways, if that's the direction they choose to go. It's stable, they never tipped me off, or injured me, but it still required a fair bit of negotiating with the dogs before it worked. Do not attach any dog to anything with wheels unless that dog has gone through extensive training to know how to safely move with whatever it's attached to. This includes, but is not limited to, scooters, bikes, cars, carts, roller skates, wheelchairs, rollators, and much more. Sincerely, a service dog handler whose dog had to go through lots of training to learn how to safely walk alongside my mobility aids, automatically match my speed, ignore any distractions, and learn how to safely maneuver/position himself just right, and so he doesn't accidentally get in the way. Dogs are strong. They can pull with a lot of force when they're excited, and if they're not trained to know how to safely move with anything on wheels, either you or the dogs will get hurt by accident. Don't mess around with safety. If your dog isn't trained to know how to do something safely, then don't do it at all. Story 3. Not wearing hearing protection when necessary. Tinnitus sucks. Back this. We sat behind the range all day. Turns out hearing 556 all day from maybe 15 meters with no ear pro hurts the night after. The range master told me I didn't need it unless I was in the firing position. Lost a decent chunk of my hearing on my right side due to pure stupidity on my end. I decided to set off an XL Roman candle in my hands, thinking it would spit out a ton of little shots. Nope, full of mortars. Completely lost my hearing in my right ear for a couple of months, and when it came back it was permanently muffled, and I now have tinnitus. There is a huge increase in people becoming deaf or hard of hearing at a much younger age than previously, largely due to loud concerts/music venues/the introduction of personal headphones, the lack of or not following safety protocols, and the folly of youth that thinks they're indestructible. We're reaping the harvest on that one now. I used power tools as a teen and through my 20s without earplugs or earmuffs. I also attended some concerts without earplugs. At one show, I didn't wear earplugs and it was a disaster for my hearing. The pain was intense. I was dizzy and vomiting, and my friend had to drive us back home in my car about half an hour into the show. It was disappointing, embarrassing, incapacitating, and horrid in every way. Now I have tinnitus and am partially deaf, which can make a person kind of irritable at times. Dad and Grandpa were always after us, my brothers and me to wear earplugs, and we almost never did. To top that off, we'd pull the mufflers of the tractors that we ran and listen to them cackle while working. I was also the a-hole kid who had an obnoxiously loud pickup, and I'd run with the windows down all the time just to listen to that big block roar. Of course, now I'm in my early 40s and I just finished my initial workup for a set of hearing aids. Got my hearing aids at 45. It's in the top 3 best things I've ever done. I did not use enough hearing protection when I was younger. I spent 3 hours per week mowing them on a yard tractor, and the muffler often was worn out. Also, turns out I have a genetic disposition for hearing loss on both sides. I'd been struggling with hearing loss for a while, but it was the tinnitus that finally got to me. It was horrendous. I got a set of hearing aids that work really well for me and are tuned great. It's basically eliminated the tinnitus, made it so that I can hear discussions in meetings, and made it so I could communicate with my wife and kids. Story 4. Sleep deprivation. Damn nearly died in a car accident, round 1, and then went mildly psychotic and paranoid, round 2. Just dumb. There are better paths to adrenaline-fueled euphoria. Never make decisions when you are tired but don't know it. What does that mean? You clearly stayed up 16 plus hours, and you should be tired, but you don't feel it. Don't make decisions. At that point, you'll start having all sorts of racing negative thoughts, doom and gloom, wanting to break up with your boyfriend, etc. You might even have mild hallucinations. Was that a bug? No, just a shadow. I'm in high school. There was a psychology class that had a bunch of things that you could do for extra credit. One was to stay up over 24 hours and document it. I did this with a friend who took the class. We were 16 or 17 at the time and only stayed up roughly 40 hours. My friend randomly recorded a video of us during the experiment. This was in the early 2000s, so we didn't have cell phones or anything like that. We re-watched the video the following weekend, and I remember being surprised by 2 things. One of them was that there were whole events that I had no recollection of, despite obviously being conscious in the video. It was just blank. The other was that the more tired that I got, the more I was trying to fidget with the rubber bands on my braces, even though I had forgotten to put them in. The other thing that I remember from the experiment was early in the morning, my friend's mom took us to a 24-hour diner. I was chattering at her, and I kept accidentally swearing. My normal "don't swear in front of parents" filter was not functioning. She didn't seem to care, but every time I'd realize a second or 2 later and kind of cringe. Private EMT years ago did a 72-hour shift, watching myself and my partner slowly deteriorate and still being expected to be responsible for each other, and our patient permanently changed how I viewed rest. I got a lot of auditory and visual hallucinations. He just became ill, pulled over to get sick, and felt miserable. The little bumps on the road saved our asses more times in that 3 days than I can remember. Sleep deprivation will absolutely make you its slave. Story 5. First responder here, garage door springs. Let a pro fix them. I work at a heavy machine shop. There is a shop door and there's a man's door. If you need to walk in or out, you should use the main door. It may seem like such a harmless thing, but the massive overhead doors are really heavy, and should something fail, and it fails, you are no match for its speed and weight. It will thoroughly mess you up. I'm a door tech. I once responded to a call on a 10 by 10 door where the homeowner tried to adjust the springs himself. Unclear exactly what happened, but somehow he released all the tension and it hit him and it knocked him off his ladder. He survived with a mangled hand and a nasty fall. I could see dried blood on the floor when I got there. My ex did this, thought he was smart and that he'd fix the big-ass spring himself. He was holding the tension for as long as possible. When it was released, it flew by his face and cut the crap out of his hand. I ran to Walgreens and got butterfly bandages. He somehow kept it together till it healed and avoided stitches. I'm still traumatized from that dumb crap. I've had a few snaps on me over the past 17 years that I've lived in this house. I have springs on either side, 2 per door, with a safety wire through the middle for just such an eventuality. The first time it happened, it sounded like a gunshot, and a half coil of spring was embedded deep into the drywall about 10 feet away. Thankfully, nobody was in the garage at the time. It was then I truly understood the safety cable. It keeps the whole spring from becoming a missile. and I only have 100-pound springs, which are fairly lightweight as garage door springs go. Story 6. Customs officers. They have no sense of humor. Don't ask me how I know. The first time I went to the USA, I was on the website of the National Security Service reading everything to make sure I had everything correct. The first thing I read in the FAQ and tips page is, do not try to make fun of the customs officer. Well, thank you so much, National Security Service of the United States of America. I was absolutely not planning to, but damn. My mom and I did the bridge walk from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, USA, and to Sault Ste. Marie, Canada. We were told by numerous event staff, Michigan Police, Canadian Mounted Police, USA Side Bridge workers, etc., 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 that we did not need a full passport for the walk, just valid ID because it was a special event. Canada welcomed us. US Customs are mean. We got detained trying to come back in. I have 2 rules for going through customs. Answer the question asked. Do not offer information. I was with a group that got delayed after 2 people had been evasive about the questions that they were being asked, but wouldn't shut up about other stuff that they were carrying and had done on the trip, so they thought they were nervous drug mules. Body cavity searches suck. Went through LAX and customs there after coming back from Japan and had to pee in the worst way. When the customs agent asked me if I had to declare anything, I wasn't thinking and just said, I have to find the bathroom. Apparently that was enough to have them pull me aside and told them to please take me to the bathroom where I could pee and they could watch me to see what was going on. I didn't care, but it sucked when they got out their gloves. When I was a teenager, my parents, my best friend, and I were traveling out of the US for vacation. Customs took my friend into another area and interrogated her to see if she was being trafficked, I assume. It really shook us up, especially her. But damn, I'm glad they did that in retrospect. But my dad's nervous jokes did not land, LMAO. He tried to smooth the tension, and I thought my mom was going to have a heart attack. We went on a trip with my parents and my little brother, 16, and his friend, 16. So the customs officer at the border checks IDs and sees 2 adults, a teen with the same name, and a teen with a name that does not match anyone. And who does Mr. Smith belong to? Because she was not a fool, my mom promptly answered, the people who wrote this letter, and handed over the letter from his parents giving permission for international travel, written according to the guidelines. No joking, no fussing, just polite smiles and efficiency. Story 7. Paying my taxes. Worked for myself through college and didn't have a penny to spare, so I just didn't file for 3 years, figuring I'd pay it off when I was done and working. Ironically, my first job after graduating was for the State Tax and Revenue Department. They figured it out and gave me a month to make good. Paid some pretty serious interest and penalties and learned to never do that again. Had a friend that owed the IRS money. The guy was broke, like he owned nothing. He had a decent job, but was paying a bunch of child support. Anyway, the IRS shows up at his house to see if he has anything that they could confiscate for back taxes. I have been in his apartment. It was a studio. In the studio was his bicycle. He had no car, a crappy, lumpy sofa, a 2-chair kitchen table, and a 13-inch black and white TV. So the agent realizes this guy has nothing. They make a deal. He will pay $100 per paycheck until the debt is paid back. This worked great for a couple of months. Then he gets his next paycheck and the net was like $12. The IRS took everything else. So my friend calls up the IRS and says, "Hey, I thought we had a deal." The IRS says, well, we need more than $100 a paycheck to pay this off. Too bad. So the guy just says, do you think you can survive on $12 a paycheck? If that is the case, I will just quit my job and stand on a street corner and panhandle. I will make a lot more than $12 in 2 weeks, and you guys won't get anything. The next paycheck was back to $100. I'm currently on a payment plan with the IRS. I chose an affordable monthly payment. They mailed me a letter stating that my payment was increased, with it now being over 2 times the original amount. Oh, and I'm being charged $50 for the inconvenience of them making the adjustment. Of course. I've already set it up as an automatic payment, so it would cost me to change that too. Now, I just have to make sure I have the money for their payment. The worst part is that I work for a non-profit. With my normal deductions, only 3.5% of my income was being withheld. It should have been closer to 7% of my income that was being taken out, but I had no idea until I did my taxes and owed a ridiculous amount. Now, I have to actively withhold money from each paycheck in order to not owe at tax time. It's so confusing and exhausting. A few years ago, my car tabs needed to be renewed, but I didn't have the money right away to pay for them. So I let them slide until the next month, and when I had the money, I ended up spending it on other bills, and then didn't have the money again for the tabs. So I let it slide another month. 12 months later, I was driving with a coworker to work when a state trooper pulled up behind me at a stoplight. I knew then and there I was cooked, and sure as hell the light turned green. I pulled through the intersection and his lights turned on. So I pull over and get my license and registration, and then asks why I'm driving around with hella expired tabs. He told me if I didn't get my ass down to the DMV literally the next day and get them current and send him proof, he was gonna have to write me a ticket for felony tax evasion. Thankfully, I had the next day off work, but I had to sit in the DMV drive-thru for 4 hours because they still didn't allow people in the lobby the year after COVID. I tell you what though, I'd sit in the drive-thru again to avoid having felony tax evasion on my record. One time it took me years to pay off my $7,500 tax bill, and then during COVID they sent me a check for that amount, and I said, "Ooh, refund," and cashed it. They then sent a letter saying, "Oops, our bad, send it back." I was pregnant and not working by then. I sent a letter saying, "Since it was your bad, can we just let this go? Plus I'm pregnant, and you know, COVID." They said, "Okay, but we're counting this as income, so I have to pay tax on it." My husband was amazed. I thank you. Did the same, but mine was the opposite. I dropped out of college for a few years, drank a lot, and waited tables. I ended up not filing for taxes from 18 to 28, thinking I would owe money each year because I'm an idiot. When I met my wife, we were both waiters at Bubba Gump's and tax season rolled by. She was so excited and talking about all of the shots that she was going to buy. I was so dense that for 10 freaking years, I did not know that I was owed a refund. Bro, when I told you that I was floored, there were times when I was on food stamps and needed money desperately, and I knew had I known to file my taxes, if probably not had a few times where I was homeless and hungry. I still can't believe I never picked up on that. Story 8. In-ground yellow jackets. Paid the dude with a bee suit and the right crap to kill them safely. Ugh, discovered a nest while weeding in a flower garden a couple of years ago. Got stung 4 to 5 times before I got away. I tried a few things to get rid of them and had given up, and was about to call a professional for help when raccoons dug up the nest in the middle of the night and took care of them for me. About time those raccoons were useful. They dug up another nest in the middle of my lawn that I hadn't discovered yet, so it's nice to know that they're still on duty. A couple of months ago, I had a plumber digging out my septic tank to install risers. He hit an underground nest and ran screaming as I came out of the house. This dude shakes them off. He'd probably been bitten a dozen times, walks over to his trunk and grabs this low-grade flamethrower thing. I think they use it to seal pipes. But I'm no plumber. He fries the nest with a vengeance and goes back to work like a boss. I tipped well. Let me tell you a funny story about in-ground yellow jackets. As a former city slicker, I just moved to the country. I was walking around on my new land and I discovered what looked like bees coming out of a large hole in the ground. I did a very quick Google search and immediately decided they were ground bees. Aw, how cute. Who knew ground-dwelling bees were a thing? Knowing bees to be mostly docile unless threatened, I sat down right beside this hole, took out my phone, and spent literally 10 minutes filming the ground bees coming and going from their nest. My hand was sometimes only an inch or two away from the nest. Anyway, I went about my day happily. That evening, I showed my husband my discovery. He died laughing, and was also dumbfounded by the fact that I never got stung. Yep, you guessed it, they were definitely yellow jackets. Maybe they left me alone because they knew I was an idiot and felt sorry for me, lol. TLDR spent time hanging out close up and personal with an entire nest of in-ground yellow jackets. They decided to have mercy on me because of my stupidity. For real. Didn't learn the hard way, but we once had an in-ground nest right by our garage. Had to open the door, drive in quickly, then close the door quickly, almost like an airlock, lest we get attacked. The pest control guy came by on his own time for 5 straight days to spread delta dust on the area. The first day, he left his truck running at the bottom of the hill with the door open, spread the dust, and ran like hell back to the car, chased by the Yellow Jackets, hearing them hitting the window as he slammed the door. By day 4, he got close enough to find the opening and get a good amount into the nest, and came back day 5 to finish them off. Some years later, I found the hole and stuck a stick down in it, and that thing went down at least a foot. Can't imagine how many of those mean offers were down there. Last summer, we were hiking on a steep slope and our dog stepped in a yellow jacket nest. The entire swarm came out like a scene from a horror movie, just like a giant black wall of angry buzzing. They focused on me, not my husband or dog. I ended up with 50+ stings all over my body, but mostly my back and ass, plus scars from the briar patch I tore through trying to escape them. My husband was afraid I was going to go into shock, so he drove me straight to the hospital. Luckily, I didn't go into shock, but I was sent home with a painkiller, directions to coat me in a baking soda slurry, and an EpiPen that I now have to carry everywhere with me because we know you weren't allergic to bee stings before, but now we have no idea how your body will react. Screw Yellow Jackets. Story 9. Inverted storm surge. This happens as a hurricane approaches a coastline. If you search, you'll find pictures of people walking around in shallow, empty stretches of beach. The storm gets close enough, and the low pressure within the eye basically sucks up millions of gallons, pulling it away from the shore. It can go for miles sometimes, depending on the strength. Anyway, that water comes back, with prejudice. I grew up on the Alabama Gulf Coast. Walked down to the beach as a hurricane was approaching. I was in middle school and had no idea you couldn't see a hurricane the same way that you can see a tornado. Anyway, the beach was drained entirely. Not knowing any better, I walked out to the end of the public fishing pier that would normally be about 8 to 9 feet deep. A few minutes passed, and I was satisfied with this excursion, so I turned around. About 2/3 of the way back to the shore, I felt the ground rumble, and I instinctively hauled ass fast as I could. I'd say I finally got to about 20 feet from a jetty, rocks piled up to mitigate erosion, and got hit from behind by a wall of water. It actually carried me up and onto the very top of the jetty, and slammed me down. I could feel that my sandals left my feet, and by pure luck they floated up and gently settled right by my hands where I was holding onto the rocks. The water receded slightly, enough for me to get over the jetty and away from the beach. I was so embarrassed that I never told my mom about it and snuck into my house to get a shower and change. Fast forward to 2017, when I was living on the Florida Gulf Coast, a bunch of people walked down into Tampa Bay right as Hurricane Irma was rolling in. I legit got anxious watching the footage from the local TV station. Needless to say, I've never gone anywhere near the water ahead of a hurricane again. Story 10. Weathermen. Heard one on TV say, "If you're within the sound of my voice, get to your tornado place now." I was a little jaded due to the many times I'd heard this before. Still, I told my son to get in the hallway, and then went outside to get our beagles. And I saw the freaking thing. A 400-meter wide F4 coming down our road. I got in the hallway with just a couple of big couch cushions, pulled my son into my lap, hunched over him, and held the pillows over us. He was unhurt. I had a dislocated shoulder with a few torn ligaments, tendons and muscles, a splintered ball, a torn rotator cuff, and so on. I was in so much pain that once all the pieces stopped moving, I didn't even realize I had hundreds of pieces of rock, splinters, and glass embedded in my skin, mainly my back. Not a single thing even scratched my son. Had I gotten moving the moment he said that on the TV, we would have been sandwiched between 2 mattresses. We lived, both of us, both dogs, and our cat. It seemed like we were all huddled under those 2 cushions. One of the dogs had a single glass shard in his neck on the left side. It fell out when he started walking. I had pieces of stuff being pushed out of my skin for the next month. The house, there's not much left. Of a $290,000 house, it took $273,000 to rebuild it. The foundation and much of the framing were okay. Edit. This was the Enterprise AL tornado on March 1st, 2007. There were 8 students killed at the high school and 1 elderly woman just down the road from the school. 50 plus were injured from this in the area. Our daughter was at the school. It took 4 to 5 hours to find her. She was badly traumatized from the experience, but luckily only light injuries. This experience affected our family mentally for years, if not a lifetime. There are so many others who are as well. We did not have a shelter and did not put one in. Basements are not common in that area. I was stationed at Fort Rucker with 2 years to go until retirement. Tornadoes of that kind were not common in that area of the US. With climate change, they are now. Insurance paid for most of the repairs and replacement of our house and stuff. Non-recoverable deprivation took a big chunk of our savings though. This is something so few people realize will financially affect them in a large loss like this. We currently live in Florida. We've been through a few hurricanes turned tropical storms, but not a direct hit. We care for my mother-in-law who is 83 and has dementia. Once she passes, we are moving, likely to Tennessee near our daughter. I would take a tornado over a hurricane. We were 18 miles west of the damaged path of Hurricane Michael. What we saw of the damage from that during recovery efforts was staggering. I have been to a war in the Middle East. While those experiences helped me process that one, the sheer destruction visited upon Florida was mind-numbing. 2 years ago, we spent 8 hours in a strong tropical storm with 70-mile-per-hour winds and gusts to 90. The tornado lasted less than 2 minutes from when I first saw it to when I stepped outside to survey the area. Except for the minor intrusion of water from our pool, we didn't have a single bit of flooding from the tornado. With my combat experience, very little scares me these days. There was surprisingly little fear during the tornado considering. Most of it came from trying to find our daughter. That tropical storm, the length of time, the wind, and the amount of rain, that was scary. My injuries were more extensive than just the shoulder and cut bruises. Due to a TBI from an explosion in Iraq, I suffered a secondary TBI from the tornado as well. My shoulder was put back in place by EMTs in the area, and surgery didn't happen until after we moved back in. Too much to do. The TBI wasn't recognized or treated until after we had moved back in. Honestly, I knew I had another TBI, but my family needed me to be strong for them, especially our kids. Once things settled down, I started getting regular headaches. Next thing you know, I'm at the Shepherd Center in Atlanta for 4 months, and also 2 months of hyperbaric treatments in New Orleans. We are all doing well these days. When we are all together, we often talk about that day. It is as much a part of our family history as any other significant event. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a story similar to these that you want to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe if you haven't yet. For more videos like this one right now, please stop